And we know what Trump's going to do. He's going to lower the business tax rate to 15%. Our combined federal provincial is 38%. There's no carbon tax in the US. We have to think about, how do we lower emissions without a carbon tax? The Americans do it. How could we do it?
Hey friend, it's Jasmine Lane. The left has not learned a damn thing from Donald Trump's victorious win, which is really too bad because boy, if they were willing to listen, there is so much that they could learn. Really, in pure democratic fashion, if you want to win the public's approval, you want to win the vote, you should probably, listen to the public. Hit that subscribe button, like the video, and of course, share your comments down below.
I look forward to working with President Trump once again to strengthen North American economic opportunities for the middle class.
As you just heard there, the Prime Minister says he's looking forward to working with President Donald Trump again, but bilateral relations were rocky, to say the least, during Trump's first term. The renegotiation of NAFTA was a roller coaster. Trump imposed punishing tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. And let's not forget the interpersonal challenges between the two leaders. Remember this hot mic moment in 2019 and Trump's response?
It was like, it's a big 40 minutes.
Well, he's two-faced.
I wanted to start off with a quick question, if I could, Mr. Morneau, on the outcome of the election. And if it caught you by surprise at all, or if you have an understanding of why, in your view, Trump did win, what you think the issue set was.
Well, I have to be honest, I wouldn't have taken a bet one way or the other because the polls were so hard to read. But fundamentally, I thought that the challenge that the incumbent, effectively Harris, was facing was inflation, and that's a pretty important challenge for any incumbent government these days. So I don't think we should be surprised that people decided that they wanted to look to a new team, and that's the challenge we face in all Western democracies right now.
Ms. Ambrose, was it inflation? Is that the key, do you think?
I think it was inflation, and I think but it must have been more than that, because his win was so overwhelming. I mean, that is what shocked me the most. I mean, people call him a racist, a Nazi, and everything else, and yet he increased his vote amongst women, amongst minorities, in places that, in New York, in places that are heavily Democratic. I mean, it was shocking. I thought he would win because he had the momentum behind him. And Kamala Harris made some serious missteps in how she was communicating what she would do different from Biden. But there's got to be more to it. And I think part of it is this sense that Trump, as the strong man, is going to do whatever it takes to protect the borders, to protect the jobs, and settle things in the world that feel chaotic right now. And it's the way he talks to people. And I think that resonated with a lot of Americans.
That is the problem with identity politics. You say these things to further divide your communities and to pit people against each other, which is a horrible thing for any government to do, and many are guilty of it. But when you've had a government doing that for 9 years, you are absolutely going to finally see a breaking point where people say, you know what, actually, I'm tired of being called names. I'm tired of being scared to talk about things that really matter. I'm tired of the ideological government that has turned our society into this place. And that is exactly what we saw with Donald Trump winning as significantly as he did. It came as no surprise. To be honest, the only reason why I speculated he might not win was because I thought perhaps they would take him out. It was very clear that the left did not want Trump to win. But finally, the right is starting to get its voice back.
It's not, only how he was talking about that stuff, Mr. Morneau. He put some specifics on the table about how he was, for example, going to protect the American economy and American jobs. And chief among that is this across-the-board 10% tariff on imports, all imports. I was told by someone in the Prime Minister's office this week, Canada has received no assurances that we would be exempt from the application of those tariffs. If you were still finance minister, how much would that worry you?
Well, obviously it's worrying everyone a lot around the world, not just in Canada. I expect that what we need to do now is to think about how we can, communicate, as we did last time, the importance of the Canada-US trade relationship. But we're going to need to go further. We're going to need to think about what policy initiatives, what substance can we actually think about that will align with the kinds of things that the new president is going to want to focus on. So we'd be worried, and we should be worried, and we need to be on the top of our game and think about what we can do to improve our outcomes.
I'm going to quickly follow up with you before I go back to Ms. Ambrose and ask, when you think about what those kinds of policies might be, what are they? What are a couple of things that you think the federal government should pursue that would be in line with the type of things that you think would resonate in the White House now?
Well, the world's changed a lot since the last negotiation. The geopolitics have changed dramatically, so with that you need to think about defense. Obviously, technology has risen as a critical determinant of the status of the U.S. versus China, so we need to think about how we align with the U.S. in the technology sector. And obviously, we're going to need to think about some of the economic issues that we're going to face. So energy security is going to be critical. We're going to be forced to think about the dairy sector. So as I go through those one by one, we will need to think about how we get to our defense spending targets more rapidly than the government has currently laid out. We're going to need to think about, whether we focus on energy security in a way that makes us clearly an important part of the U.S. sector that way. And that means we have to ask ourselves, is it really the right time for caps on emissions? Is it that we need to be moving really fast on carbon capture and sequestration at the same time? So that'll be critically important. And we'll need to ask ourselves, and this is some hard questions, should we really move forward on a digital services tax on technology when technology is going to be a critical issue for the U.S. to stay in the ascendancy? And should we be looking carefully at our supply managed sectors to think about what we're going to do when we're inevitably faced with that issue in an upcoming discussion? So these are hard policy choices. I think they're the right things to be putting on the table to think about now. It's not only about having great relationships, it's also about the substance of what we're actually going to do to be a good partner to the United States.
If I interpret that right, Ms. Ambrose, it's like the context has changed. So the government, and I know, as a conservative, you would disagree with some of the stuff the government has pursued. But putting aside, I guess, that view, does the changing context in the States, as Mr. Morneau points out, kind of necessitate a different approach on stuff that has been ideologically valuable to the government?
Absolutely. We are in a completely different situation. I mean, the government has an economic update coming up, I think at the end of November. And I would recommend that if they've written it, they rewrite it and they look at it and make sure that it outlines the domestic economic policies that will make us competitive. I mean, we've got two trains coming at us. We've got the tariff war that's coming at us from Trump. There's only so much we can control there. And as Bill said, there's things that we can put on the table and we've got to hit back hard and retaliate with our own tariffs. But the other is within our control, and that's our domestic economic policies. And we know what Trump's going to do. He's going to lower the business tax rate to 15%. Our combined federal provincial is 38%. There's no carbon tax in the US. We have to think about, how do we lower emissions without a carbon tax? The Americans do it. How could we do it? We've just put a cap on production in our oil and gas sector, and we're the only country in the world to do that, which makes energy more expensive. Trump is saying he's going to deregulate in all kinds of sectors to make energy cheaper as an input for businesses and homes. So we just increased the new capital gains tax inclusion rate, which is a drain on innovators, small businesses, startups. All of these things that we've been pursuing, which is a higher tax agenda, right from the carbon tax to the capital gains tax, is a drain on productivity and it's a drain on investment.
Are you starting to see it now? All of these things that the Liberals brought in under, it's so compassionate, it's so nice, it's so great that we're doing these things. But no, it's actually absolutely horrible. It's making everything more expensive. It's making people pull out of our economy, big businesses. It's making people not want to invest in Canada. And that is hurting us, but they keep saying we gotta do this. Well, why are they saying that? Could it be because they have printed so much money, because we are in a debt larger than we've ever seen before as a country due to their overspending in these ridiculous ideological things that nobody asked for, and the general public has also said quite loudly we don't actually want. And so, of course, the Trudeau government wants carbon tax. Of course, they are going to try their best to convince you that you want it. Of course, they're going to put on all of these new taxes because they have no money. They have spent all of our money to fund these things that we didn't agree to and don't want for their own ideological gains.
We've got to become more competitive, and we're not doing that here at home. We have a chance to do that. And we're going to continue to be uncompetitive with the U.S. if we don't.
You've been on the inside of this government, Mr. Morneau. Do you think there will be a willingness to do that? And I ask because, you both point out, for example, the cap on emissions that was just introduced last week, the digital sales tax, a host of other things. Like, that is in line with what the government says their values are. Is it a hard pivot for them to make, Mr. Morneau, or do you also view it as one they have to?
Well, Ron and I largely agree on the fact that we really need to consider the fact that the world has changed. So if you're asking, do I think it'll be tough for the government to come to decisions that we need to make in order to have a good chance of having a strong position in our negotiations? Yes, it'll be tough for them to come around to that. But I don't think there's really a choice. We need to think about how we can better align ourselves with their goals. We need to understand the legitimacy of their election and the fact that, Trump has a real mandate, and so he needs to follow through on that mandate. And the only way we can enable ourselves to be successful in that negotiation is by moving in directions that make sense for us and that make sense for us to work together with them. And
do you think the government should pause or delay the cap on emissions?
Well, my view is that energy is one of the most important sectors in Canada. Clearly, it's a hugely important issue for the United States, energy security. So we should look at that and say, how can we meet our goals from a climate standpoint? And I would identify, moving faster with the energy industry on carbon capture and sequestration. And at the same time, I would question whether putting caps on emissions right now is the right time.
So in essence, like many of us already knew, the vast majority of Trudeau's climate policies and taxes are stupid. Not just because they are very harmful to the economy, growth, and development of our country. They're also stupid on a global scale in terms of our partnerships and how much people respect Canada. I'm Jasmine Lane. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I'd love to know your take on this issue. Is there hope? Or do you feel like Canada is doomed? Do we need an election now? Let me know in the comments down below. Subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video, and I will talk to you very soon.